Welcome. After our last program, the real question is, how is it that America's prestigious universities are being corrupted? It's an interesting story.
The Baker Brief with law professor John Baker. Your weekly dispatch from the battlefield of ideas.
In understanding what's happened in universities, we need to distinguish, at least at the outset, free speech from what has become known as academic freedom. The story of speech and the First Amendment in this country is a long one that begins in 1798 with the Alien and Sedition Acts and is not resolved by a court, but is resolved because Jefferson wins by winning the presidency in 1800. Academic freedom, the universities involved to a certain extent free speech, but more importantly for our purposes, it involves what we call academic freedom. Academic freedom is not a constitutional right. It was a right invented where else? In universities, and has received wide acceptance, but it is protected by what's called tenure, which is a contract, is enforceable by state law, meaning it's difficult to fire any professor who has tenure except for certain limited reasons. So professors have been able to say and do much of what they want to do without having to be accountable for it. But let's look at the origins of this. And for that, I turn to an article in 1985 by the then president of Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Stephen Muller. This was the anniversary, the 150th anniversary of the German who actually came up with the whole idea of academic freedom. That was Wilhelm von Humboldt. And he created a new university in Berlin. And it was from that Americans borrowed the model as to what an American university should be. I've said before, Johns Hopkins was the first one really to adopt it in toto. But basically, Harvard was already doing the same thing. Why is this significant? Well, when you see what comes out of it, you realize how we actually change the whole idea of what the purpose of a university is, which I've gone in before to some extent in talking about Harvard. So from the article by Dr. Muller, quote, what Americans discovered in von Humboldt's Prussian university was an institution committed to two dominant concepts, freedom of scientific inquiry and the unity of teaching and research. This is the origin of the so-called research university. These two concepts inspired not only the reform, but the creation of the American university. Now, Muller goes on to say this, which is very interesting. Quote, when von Humboldt put forward the idea of freedom of teaching and study, he meant above all freedom from religious orthodoxy and the notion that scientific knowledge could be discovered rather than learned as revealed in the past was in fact heretical. In other words, this is a radical overturning of the purpose of education. It is not for the student to learn as much as it is for professors to have the freedom to explore without any kind of orthodoxy. To a large extent, that may be fine, but what happens when there is no relationship between theory, not just the practical world, but reality? So, on the other hand, what about the student's right to learn? Well, guess what? You would never know this from American sources, but I'm going to quote from a publication, an article in a publication from Canada by Professor Shannon Day. Quote, von Humboldt's educational reforms enshrined the twin concepts of, and I won't pronounce the German word, freedom to teach, and the other was the freedom to learn under the rubric, and again, I won't pronounce it, academic freedom. But what did this mean? She goes on. Fortunately, by this time, academic freedom had begun to take root in America. In 1915, in particular, the nascent American Association of University Professors, which really is the lobby for academic freedom, And in this statement, she says, the statement that they gave reprised the Humboldtian assertion of the freedom to teach and the freedom to learn. But in light of the AAUP's remit, what were they? Their lobbying association for professors confined itself to the former. In other words, they dropped the right of students to learn. Now, there is no professional association for students, really, that has the clout that the educational associations have. And eventually, I'm going to tie all of this into the money. As the saying goes, follow the money. There have been court cases a good bit on free speech, often to protect students on universities, at least state universities, but nothing really to the right to learn or a right to learn. Academic freedom is not based on the Constitution, as I said, unlike free speech. So what we have in the universities today is the emergence or the eruption of what is the purpose of a university. Going back to the last program where the UCLA professor said, basically, there's no purpose for learning here. There's no purpose for teaching. I've got to get out of here because really it's all been politicized. Well, guess what happened? Von Humboldt's ideas were crushed not long that, well, it was about a century later. By whom? Those who crushed academic freedom and free speech were known as the National Socialists, otherwise known to us mostly as the Nazis. And they came in and they crushed everything and replaced people with their own party members. We have something being attempted in the United States, not from the outside, from a political force, not from the right wing trying to do this. No, it's coming from within the universities. Socialists and Marxists deliberately working together in a political, not an academic sense only, to take over universities. And it is happening now. With that happy thought, we'll end, and I'll ask you to join me again next time.
To ensure your continued access to the Baker Brief, please note our additional channels listed below. And remember to like and subscribe using the bell icon.